The crimson mare reared against the morning sky, her hooves striking the air like thunderbolts, as three grown men scattered from the training ring. Blood trickled from a gash on Corbin Fletcher's forearm, where her teeth had found their mark. And the other handlers backed away with the wary respect of soldiers retreating from a battlefield. "That's the fourth trainer this month," muttered Weston Briggs, the ranch foreman, as he watched the magnificent creature dance her violent ballet in the center of the ring. Her coat gleamed like burnished copper in the early light, every muscle defined beneath skin that had never known a gentle touch. "Maybe it's time we admit defeat." The White Horse Ranch had seen difficult horses before, but nothing like this one. She had arrived 6 months ago, wild-caught from the Nevada mountains, her spirit as untamed as the desert winds that had shaped her. The previous owner had given up after she'd put 2 experienced wranglers in the hospital. Now she was theirs, a beautiful, deadly puzzle that no one seemed able to solve. Quentin Whitehorse, the ranch owner, stood at the fence watching his investment literally kick holes in his equipment. At 62, he'd broken more horses than most men had seen, but something about this mare unsettled him. It wasn't just her aggression, it was the intelligence in her dark eyes, the calculated way she moved, as if she was studying her captors, as much as they studied her. "She's not just wild," he said quietly to Weston. "She's angry." The mare had earned a reputation that stretched across 3 counties. Word had spread about the blood-red devil that couldn't be broken, the horse that fought like she had nothing left to lose. Trainers came from as far as Colorado to test their skills against her, and all left defeated, some bearing scars that would remind them of their hubris for years to come. Local cowboys began calling her Scarlet's Fury, though no one remembered who had first given her that name. She became a legend, a cautionary tale told in saloons and at rodeos. Betting pools formed around which trainer would be brave enough to try next, and how long they'd last before she sent them running. But beneath the fear and fascination, something else stirred in the hearts of those who watched her. There was a magnificence to her defiance, a raw beauty in her refusal to submit. She moved with the grace of a dancer and the power of a storm, and even as she terrorized everyone who came near, they couldn't help but admire her. The veterinarian, Dr. Lennox Hartwell, had examined her from a safe distance and declared her physically sound. "Nothing wrong with her body," he'd told Quentin. "Whatever's broken is in here." He'd tapped his temple. "And that's not something you can fix with a rope and spurs." As the sun climbed higher, the mare finally stopped her aggressive display and retreated to the far corner of the ring. She stood there, sides heaving, watching the humans with eyes that held more pain than fury. For just a moment, her guard dropped, and those who looked closely could see something that the chaos had hidden, a deep, aching loneliness that no amount of rage could mask. That evening, as the ranch hands nursed their wounds and shared their war stories, none of them noticed the solitary figure approaching the training ring in the gathering dusk. Celeste Morningstar moved through the shadows with the silence of someone who had learned to listen before speaking, to observe before acting. At 28, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her slight frame, but those who knew her understood that true strength often came in unexpected packages. She had arrived at White Horse Ranch that afternoon, her pickup truck dusty from the long drive from Wyoming. Word had reached her about the impossible mare, not through the usual channels of professional trainers and horse magazines, but through the whispered conversations of native elders who understood that some spirits required different medicine. Celeste's grandmother had been a horse whisperer before the term became commercialized, before it meant anything other than the ancient art of communicating across the species divide. She had taught Celeste that every horse carried stories in their bodies, trauma written in the language of muscle memory and fear. The mare stood in the moonlight like a living flame, her red coat almost black in the darkness. She lifted her head. As Celeste approached, nostrils flaring to catch the stranger's scent. But instead of the usual aggressive display, she simply watched, her intelligent eyes tracking every movement. "They've been trying to break you," Celeste said softly, her voice carrying no further than the mare's ears. "But you were never meant to be broken, were you, girl?" The mare took a step forward, then stopped, her body language a mixture of curiosity and caution. Celeste settled onto the ground outside the fence, making herself small and non-threatening. She had learned long ago that the first lesson in horse psychology was patience, not the grudging tolerance most people called patience, but the deep, oceanic patience of someone who understood that healing happened in its own time. For an hour they sat in silence, woman and horse studying each other across the divide of species and circumstance. Celeste could see the tension in the mare's body, the way she held herself ready to fight or flee, but she could also see something else. A desperate longing for connection that the animal had been forced to suppress in order to survive. "I know what they did to you," Celeste whispered, her voice carrying the weight of understanding. "I can see it in the way you move, the way you protect your left side. Someone hurt you badly, didn't they? And when you fought back, they hurt you more." The mare's ears swiveled forward, the first sign of genuine interest she had shown in months. Celeste began to hum, a low, wordless melody that her grandmother had taught her, a song that was supposed to speak to the ancient part of a horse's soul, the part that remembered running free across endless plains. As the notes drifted through the night air, something miraculous happened. The mare's posture began to soften, the rigid alertness in her muscles giving way to something that might have been hope. She took another step closer to the fence, then another, until she stood just beyond reach of human hands. "That's it," Celeste murmured, continuing her gentle song. "You remember, don't you? You remember what it felt like before the fear, before the pain. You remember when humans meant safety instead of suffering." The mare stretched her neck forward, her nostrils barely brushing the fence rail. Her eyes, which had held nothing but fury for so long, now showed a glimmer of something else, a willingness to believe that not all hands brought pain, that not all voices carried threats. When Celeste finally rose to leave, the mare followed her along the fence line, whickering softly, the first sound of longing rather than rage that anyone had heard from her. As the trainer disappeared into the darkness, the mare stood at the gate, waiting for dawn. Dexter Whitehorse, Quentin's nephew and the ranch's most promising young trainer, found Celeste in the stable before sunrise, methodically preparing her equipment. Unlike the complex array of ropes, whips, and mechanical devices that previous trainers had brought, her gear was almost laughably simple. A soft rope halter, a worn leather-led line, and a lightweight saddle pad that looked older than she was. "You're really going to try it?" he asked, unable to hide his skepticism. He'd watched 3 professional bronc riders fail to last 30 seconds with the mare, and this quiet woman looked like she'd never seen the inside of a rodeo arena. Celeste looked up from her preparations, her dark eyes steady and calm. "I'm not going to try anything," she said simply. "I'm going to listen." Word had spread quickly through the ranch about the stranger who had somehow calmed the infamous mare. By the time the sun crested the horizon, a small crowd had gathered. Around the training ring, ranch hands, neighboring ranchers, and even a few reporters who had driven down from Cheyenne after hearing rumors of the attempted miracle. Weston Briggs stood near the gate, a medical kit at his feet, and his cell phone ready to call for an ambulance. He'd seen too many good people get hurt trying to prove themselves against impossible odds. "You sure about this, miss? That horse has put seasoned cowboys in the hospital." "She's not a horse," Celeste replied, checking the fit of her worn leather gloves. "She's a survivor, and survivors don't need to be broken. They need to be understood." The mare was already waiting when Celeste entered the ring, She stood in the center like a statue carved from living flame, her muscles coiled with potential energy. But her eyes were different now, still wary, but no longer filled with the blind rage that had characterized her interactions with humans. "Good morning, beautiful," Celeste said softly, her voice carrying no urgency, no demand for immediate compliance. She began to move in a wide circle around the mare, not approaching directly but simply sharing the space, allowing the animal to become accustomed to her presence. The spectators held their breath, waiting for the explosive violence they'd all witnessed before. But minutes passed, and the mare simply watched, her ears forward, her body alert, but not aggressive. Celeste continued her patient circling, occasionally humming the wordless melody that had worked such magic the night before. "She's actually listening," Dexter whispered to his uncle. "Look at her body language. She's engaged, not defensive." Slowly, incrementally, Celeste decreased the size of her circle. Each step brought her closer to the mare, but she moved with such unhurried grace that the approach felt natural, inevitable. When she was finally within arm's reach, she stopped and simply stood, allowing the mare to make the next choice. The red horse stretched her neck forward, her breath warm against Celeste's shoulder. For the first time in months, human and horse stood in the same space without violence, without fear, two beings sharing a moment of mutual trust. "That's my girl," Celeste murmured, slowly raising her hand to touch the mare's neck. The contact was brief, gentle, but it sent a ripple of amazement through the watching crowd. The untouchable horse was allowing herself to be touched. What happened next defied everything the spectators thought they knew about horse training. Instead of immediately trying to assert dominance or begin the breaking process, Celeste simply stood with the mare, her hand resting lightly on the animal's shoulder. She was teaching the most important lesson of all, that human contact could be a gift rather than a threat, a source of comfort rather than pain. The sun climbed higher as woman and horse stood together in the ring, and for the first time in months, the mare's eyes held something other than fury. They held hope. The saddle pad settled onto the mare's back like a whispered promise, rather than an act of conquest. Celeste's movements were so fluid, so integrated with the horse's own rhythm, that the action seemed less like training and more like a dance choreographed by mutual consent. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," breathed Canyon McClure, a veteran trainer who had driven 200 miles to witness what he was certain would be another spectacular failure. He'd brought his camera to document the carnage, but found himself filming something entirely different, a masterclass in communication between species. The mare's skin quivered at the unfamiliar sensation of the pad, but instead of the explosive bucking that everyone expected, she simply turned her head to look at Celeste with an expression that seemed almost questioning. "Is this okay?" her eyes seemed to ask. "Can I trust this?" "You can," Celeste murmured, understanding the unspoken communication. "You're safe with me." The lead rope came next, attached to the soft halter, with movements so gentle they barely disturbed the morning air. Each action was telegraphed in advance, each touch preceded by a moment of connection that gave the mare the choice to accept or refuse. And miraculously, impossibly, she continued to choose acceptance. Dr. Hartwell stood at the fence, his medical bag forgotten at his feet. In 30 years of veterinary practice, he'd never seen anything like this. The horse's entire demeanor had transformed. Her breathing was steady, her muscles relaxed, her attention focused entirely on the woman who had somehow unlocked the door to her guarded heart. "It's like she's a completely different animal," he said to Quentin. "Same horse, but it's as if someone lifted a terrible weight from her shoulders." Celeste began to move around the ring, the lead rope loose in her hands. The mare followed willingly, her hoofbeats falling into rhythm with her trainer's footsteps. They moved together like partners who had been dancing for years rather than minutes, each anticipating the other's movements with uncanny precision. The crowd fell silent as Celeste gradually increased their pace. Walk became trot, trot became a collected canter, and still the mare responded with eager cooperation rather than resistance. Her red coat gleamed in the strengthening sunlight, and for the first time since her capture she looked like what she truly was, not a dangerous beast to be conquered, but a magnificent creature deserving of respect and partnership. "She's ready," Celeste announced, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed ring. The words sent a collective shiver through the spectators, ready for what everyone had deemed impossible, a rider on her back. Weston stepped forward, concern written across his weathered features. "Miss, maybe we should take this slower. She's never had anyone on her back without trying to kill them." "She's never had anyone understand her before," Celeste replied, approaching the mare with the mounting block. "Have you, sweetheart?" The mare stood statue still as the block was positioned beside her. Her ears swiveled between Celeste and the unfamiliar object, but her body remained relaxed, trusting. When Celeste stepped onto the block, bringing herself level with the horse's back, the mare turned her head to watch, curious rather than afraid. "This is it," Celeste whispered, placing her hands on the mare's back. "This is where we find out if trust is stronger than fear." She swung her leg over with the fluid grace of someone who had been riding since childhood, settling into the saddle pad with movements so natural they seemed to flow like water. The mare tensed for a moment, muscle memory from months of violent encounters, but then, miraculously, she relaxed. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible across the ranch. The unrideable horse stood calmly beneath her first willing rider, her head held high with what looked remarkably like pride. "Walk on," Celeste said softly, and the mare responded instantly, moving forward with the smooth grace of a perfectly trained mount. They circled the ring once, twice, 3 times, while the watching crowd struggled to process what they were witnessing. The mare that had been deemed untrainable was not just accepting a rider. She was reveling in it. As they moved together around the ring in perfect harmony, the mare began to reveal her true nature, not the violent, unpredictable beast that months of harsh treatment had created, but the intelligent, sensitive animal she had been before fear, and pain had twisted her spirit into something dark and defensive. Cressida Fontaine, an equine behaviorist who had flown in from Kentucky specifically to study the impossible horse, found herself rewriting her notes as she watched. "This isn't breaking," she murmured into her recorder. "This is healing. The mare isn't being subdued. She's being restored." Each stride carried more confidence than the last. The mare's gait smoothed from the choppy, defensive movements of a creature expecting attack to the flowing rhythm of a horse who trusted her rider completely. Her neck arched gracefully, her tail carried high, classic signs of a happy, engaged animal rather than one cowering in submission. "Look at her expression," Dexter said to his uncle, his voice filled with wonder. "She's actually enjoying this." And she was. For the first time in months, the mare's eyes held no trace of the wild desperation that had characterized her every interaction with humans. Instead, they sparkled with something that could only be described as joy, the deep satisfaction of a creature finally understood, finally valued for what she truly was, rather than punished for what trauma had made her become. Celeste began to ask for more complex movements, figure eights, serpentines, collected gaits that required not just physical ability, but mental engagement and trust. The mare responded to each request with eager precision, as if she'd been waiting her entire life for someone to recognize her intelligence and partner with it rather than try to crush it. "She's been trying to tell us something all along," observed Sterling Hawthorne, a journalist from Western Horseman magazine who had initially come to write about the dangerous outlaw horse. "Every time she fought back, every time she resisted, She wasn't being vicious. She was saying no the only way she knew how. The transformation was so complete, so profound, that several spectators began to question whether this could possibly be the same animal that had terrorized the ranch for months. But the distinctive white star on her forehead and the small scar above her left eye confirmed her identity. This was indeed the mare they had called untouchable, untrainable, impossible. As the morning progressed, Celeste began to demonstrate the full extent of the mare's capabilities. They performed lateral movements, smooth transitions between gaits, and even basic dressage maneuvers that spoke to weeks or months of patient training. Except this was happening in real time, built on a foundation of trust rather than dominance. She knew how to do all of this already, Celeste explained to the mesmerized crowd. Someone trained her well before she was traumatized. The knowledge was always there, buried under layers of fear and defensive aggression. All I did was remind her that it was safe to remember. The revelation hit the watchers like a physical blow. This wasn't a wild Mustang that had never known human contact. This was a trained horse, possibly even a beloved companion, who had been so badly abused that she had forgotten everything except how to survive. Her violence hadn't been innate. Wildness but learned behavior, a desperate attempt to protect herself from further harm. Dr. Hartwell felt tears sting his eyes as he watched the mare's transformation. How many horses had been labeled bad or dangerous when they were simply traumatized? How many had been destroyed rather than healed because no one had taken the time to listen to what their behavior was really saying? As the sun reached its zenith, Celeste finally brought the mare to a halt in the center of the ring. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of the horse's gentle breathing and the whisper of wind through the prairie grass. In that moment, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something rare and precious. Not the breaking of a spirit, but its restoration. The mare that had been called untrainable stood quietly beneath her rider, her head turned slightly toward the crowd as if finally ready to trust the world again. 3 months later, the transformation was complete in ways that went far beyond a single miraculous ride. The mare, now called Phoenix by mutual agreement, had become the crown jewel of White Horse Ranch, not as a trophy of conquest, but as a testament to the power of understanding and patience. Celeste had stayed on as head trainer, revolutionizing the ranch's approach to difficult horses. The harsh breaking methods of the past had been replaced with her gentle techniques, and word had spread throughout the horse community about the woman who could heal the unhealable. Trainers came from across the country not to prove their dominance, but to learn her methods. Phoenix herself had blossomed into everything her hidden potential had promised. She was now the ranch's premier riding horse, sought after by experienced equestrians who appreciated her intelligence, sensitivity, and remarkable athletic ability. But more than that, she had become a teacher, helping other traumatized horses learn to trust again through her calm example. "She's not the same animal," Quentin marveled as he watched Phoenix work with a group of young riders, her patience with the children as infinite as her former rage had been destructive. "Sometimes I think she remembers what it was like to be lost, and she doesn't want any other horse to feel that way." Weston, who had been the most skeptical of Celeste's methods, had become her most devoted convert. "I've been training horses for 40 years, he admitted, and I never understood until now that we were solving the wrong problem. We kept trying to make them submit when what they needed was to feel safe. The ranch had established a program for troubled horses, using Phoenix and Celeste's methods to rehabilitate animals that other facilities had given up on. Success stories poured in weekly, each one a testament to the truth that Celeste had demonstrated that dawn morning, that healing was always possible when it was approached with wisdom and compassion. Dr. Hartwell had documented the transformation for veterinary journals, but he knew that the clinical papers couldn't capture the true miracle of what had happened. "Some things can't be measured in data," he told his colleagues. Sometimes you just have to witness love in action. The reporters and trainers who had come to see a spectacle of violence had instead become evangelists for a new way of thinking about horse training. Canyon McClure had written a best-selling book about the experience, while Cressida Fontaine had established a research foundation dedicated to understanding equine trauma and recovery. But perhaps the most profound change had occurred in Phoenix, herself. The mare who had once trusted no one now served as a therapy horse for troubled children, her gentle nature and hard-won wisdom helping young people who were struggling with their own trauma. She seemed to understand that healing was something that could be shared, passed from one wounded soul to another. On quiet evenings, Celeste would often find Phoenix standing at the pasture gate, looking out toward the mountains, where her story had begun. But there was no longing in her gaze now, no desperate desire to escape. She had found something better than freedom. She had found home. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd given up on her? Dexter asked one evening as they watched Phoenix grazing peacefully with the other horses. Celeste smiled, her hand resting on the fence rail where 6 months earlier an angry, broken horse had first allowed herself to hope. "I don't wonder," she said quietly. "I know. She would have died eventually. Maybe not in body, but in spirit. And the world would have lost something beautiful." As the sun set over White Horse Ranch, Phoenix lifted her head from the grass and nickered softly toward her human friends. It was a sound of contentment, of gratitude, of trust, fully given and completely earned. The mare they had called Untrainable had indeed been transformed, not broken and remade, but healed and restored to her true self. And in doing so, she had transformed everyone who witnessed her journey from fury to grace, proving that sometimes the most beautiful victories are not conquests at all, but acts of love that allow broken spirits to remember how to fly.